Amen. So Brazil recently had a crisis, that almost brought the nations to its knees. We were fortunate enough that one of our regular viewers and commenters lives there in Brazil, and he sent us sort of his observations and shucks, what is it when you make a judgment based off your anyway, determinations or something, I don't know, his observations and lessons learned from the recent Brazilian crisis, or the recent crisis in Brazil. If you weren't paying attention, Brazil, it was back in May, it was just last month, had a trucker strike. The truckers in the nation went on strike and refused to deliver any goods, especially fuel, and they blockaded some main roads. It was a big deal. It brought the country to a standstill, and our good friend here sent us an email about what it looked like from his end. I won't use his name. He gave me permission, but he's a professional, and I don't want to adversely affect his career. I will tell you, he's 55. Him and his wife are both 55. Highly educated, very intelligent. If you knew who he was and you'd read his comments, it comes through. No young children in the home, as far as I'm aware. Does have older parents. So what did he say? So the basics first. It was a 10-day strike. It resulted in shortages and greatly curtailed mobility and your ability to get around, and government and public services. And then the government was kind of exposed as maybe not up to the task. Some of the immediate signs were all vegetables and all fresh vegetables and like greens and stuff were just gone. Even inside 10 days in a country like Brazil, that's not quite as on this just-in-time system like we are. Vegetables and greens were gone before the end of this thing. You couldn't get them. You were only eating shelf-stable foods. That's my interpretation of what he said. There were long lines at the gas stations and the supermarkets. Public transportation was operating about half capacity. Law enforcement had first dibs on all fuel, which you figured was going to happen anyway. Hospitals prioritized emergencies. They were choosing who they were going to treat and who they were not going to treat, and the government began to behave irrationally and unpredictably, and ultimately the army was called out to break this thing up. And actually the army was called out. People were calling on the army to have a coup, to overthrow the government and have a military dictatorship, which is not unprecedented in the history of Brazil. They had a military dictatorship from like 1965 to 1985. There was price gouging and hoarding, which, by the way, I'm completely okay with. That's the free market. To me, there's no such thing as hoarding. That's your private property, and if you want to sell it or make it available, you have that right or not. So it's not hoarding, but that happened. People were, for lack of a better term, hoarding, and stores were price gouging. And again, free market, private property. If your goods can bring a price, then there's nothing wrong with you charging that price, in my opinion. But he said that some food or some items, the prices went up by 200% in some cases, and the government got involved and tamped that back down, which sounds like a good thing, and yay, go government. But in reality, that's a bad thing. We don't have time to talk about it now. What else? I think that was the big stuff. Yeah, the government was threatening the truck drivers and yada yada. Okay, so what did we learn? The big thing he learned, he said, is that this isn't his words, these are my words. Society has become very fragile. And I read this somewhere else, researching this, that other Brazilians too are saying they were shocked at how fragile the country was, how quickly this simple strike brought the country to its knees. Our friend was saying that many people in his area, and I don't know if this is nationwide, but in his area, do all of their cooking on propane, propane bottles, and there was no delivery of propane or propane bottles. he was fine because he had propane stored, but he said he knew a lot of people who were cooking outside over wood fires, which isn't as an unheard of thing in Brazil as maybe it would be here in the States. But he said a lot of people had to make that one adjustment at least early on. But basically he says the crisis is the chaos, or the chaos is the crisis, or the crisis is becoming the chaos. And I mean, I think what he means is just the chaos of the world we live in is the real crisis. You know, there's nothing holding us together. There's no unified vision. No, you know, it just feels like at any moment the whole thing could fly apart and everyone go crazy. And I think he's saying that's the first thing he learned from this is how true that is and how close it is to being a reality. That with very little outside stimulation, the whole thing can fly apart. This thing ended up, he says, actually not being an organic trucker strike the way it was portrayed. Supposedly, you know, it was this from the bottom up strike of the working class who were protesting high diesel prices. He says it turns out having been the work of a few trucking companies who were trying to bring down the government. So we'll get a quote of his in there in the end that probably deals with that. But it looks like there was manipulation by the elites to force this crisis in order to achieve some political goals, which wouldn't surprise me. There's been a changeover in the government, and they're on a big corruption crusade, and I'm sure there's some people who want to get back to the old ways. Anyway, he says anyone can get caught with their pants down. Our friend and his wife are pretty advanced in the prepping thing. They had food stored. Like I said, they had their propane. They were ahead several weeks on their propane. They had 3 bottles stored. 3 bottles of, he says 13 kilogram barrels, he calls them. I don't know how much 13 kilograms is. We're still on the system used by countries that put a man on the moon, so I'm not sure what 13 kilograms is. I'm assuming it's probably a standard little bottle like we use in our barbecue grills here. He said, you know, a lot of, you know, Brazil is nearer its roots than we are here, but he said he was shocked by how many people have forgotten their basic skills of just day-to-day living outside of an industrialized society. I remember Brazil is one of the emerging economies. Their society has supposedly, you know, come a long way economically in the last couple of decades, and he was shocked by how many people have lost touch with their roots. What did he say? Anyway, here we go. He was surprised at how long it took for people to turn into what he calls lunatic criminals. You know, he's talking about the price gouging and the hoarding, and people started getting antsy with each other in these lines. People were cutting lines and trying to get to the head of line, and he said there was some discussions rapidly evolved to road rage. The news was even less trusted, and there was a complete lack of reliable information. He said cities, in this case the city didn't become untenable. It's a beautiful day here, and you can hear the birds chirping, the kids are around, got a great little beer in our hands. This kind of trouble seems very far away, but that's the point. Oh man, party foul. That's the point. You know, Brazil's a beautiful place with beautiful people, and they drink great beers and have their children around, and this stuff happened there. You can't think it won't happen here, or can't happen here. She's mad at me for spilling my beer. So that was the other thing you realize, that anyone can get caught with their pants down. He kind of expects this stuff. He watches our channel, he watches Pastor Fox's channel, and still he wasn't completely prepared. Instead, you know, he's a little out of shape. He's 55, which isn't old by any stretch of the imagination, but he said he'd let his physical conditioning get away from him a little bit. They have a bug out location about 70 kilometers away, again, nearer than the moon, but I'm not entirely sure how far that is. It's not set up. They couldn't get there, or they didn't feel like going there was a better option than staying where they were in the city. And he says he's got to start working on his bug out location. Without cars, the city is a much better place, but it is an untenable place. So this was only a 10-day situation. Everyone was able to live through it. But he says there's no way you could transform a city. Well, I wouldn't say no way, because large cities have existed in the past without electricity. But he says it would take a lot of effort to transform a city into a place where you could live in a Tiawaki. Probably it would require some walls and a castle-like mentality. Probably not. But he does say, the urban relationship is so dependent on gas vehicles, I cannot cover all the different good and bad aspects of living with less of them. He says, it was a really nice environment, the pollution was cleaned up, you know, the air quality was better, but it wasn't a sustainable model without those engines running day and night. He says, you know, as much more prepared as they are than the people around them, he's still behind the curve. He's got to get that bug out location up and running. He considers it a homestead, which, you know, I think everyone should be heading for the homestead. He even mentions this, that you know, he knows that I would say get out of her my people, or come out of her my people. I would. So that's the big stuff he said. What did he do right, in my opinion? Well, no, that's not the big stuff. I'm going to read this verbatim. This gentleman is ethnically Jewish, so I'm going to respect his beliefs and not say the word God in his quotes. He doesn't say it either, but he leaves out the O. You know, the Jewish people don't believe you should say the name of God. So if I start stumbling, it's because I'm trying to find a way to replace God real quick on the fly. The Almighty One is benevolent and takes care of us, but we have to take care of ourselves too. Trust in the Almighty One, but lock your car. Or as I wrote down somewhere in my notes, we can trust God, but God's got to be able to trust us. You can't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. And I'm going to finish with his quote here in a minute. What did he say that I think he did well on? He had his propane stocked up. He had his food stocked up. He had food and water in a way to prepare it into a way he could cook. So you know what? He was doing pretty good. He does have some, within the restrictive laws of Brazil, he did have some ways to defend himself. But as he says, he didn't have to, because he wasn't, you know, in the middle of all the craziness, you know. To a certain extent, he had come out of her, my people, but maybe not as far as he should have come. So what he did right, he was in a good, secure location to begin with. He had his food stored. He had his propane setback, and he was able to weather out this storm, which was not an insignificant storm, and in fact isn't even over yet. I mean, the initial crisis is over. Thank you, baby. And the trucks are running again, and the shelves are stocked, and there's food, and there's water, and there's gas and whatnot. But it has exposed some fragility in the Brazilian system. They're as polarized as we are, along some similar lines. They have elections coming up. This is by no means a completely done deal. More could come out of it, and it is one more example of fragility and uncertainty and turmoil in the world around us. From someone we know. If you watch this channel and comment a lot, you've probably interacted with this gentleman, and he may identify himself in the comments if he does. But you've probably interacted with someone who has gone through a 10-day nationwide shutdown where food was restricted, where emergency services were restricted, where there were calls for a military coup, where there was actually military action against civilians. These truck drivers, whether they were right and wrong, they were Brazilian citizens, and the government came out and for right or wrong, I'm not making a judgment on this, but cleared out their protests and pulled down their blockades and sent them away. And like I said, this isn't Iran. This is Brazil. Brazil's a modern economy. Even when I was there in '89 or '88, whatever it was, it wasn't a third world country. I mean, obviously it's not downtown Manhattan, but you know, Brazil's one of the BRIC countries, in the emerging economies that are modernizing rapidly and are considered the great surefire bets for the future. They have a population that isn't crashing. It's actually growing, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but it's not. They're not in a demographic crisis lot of the rest of the West is. I mean, Brazil is a pretty good bet. A lot of natural resources, great agriculture, beautiful people, good people. You're not talking about some 19 teens banana republic in the Caribbean. This is a modern nation state with modern technology and modern amenities, and it stopped like that because a couple of trucking companies decided for whatever they decided to shut that thing down, and they did. What I've been reading is people are really shocked at how dependent they were on those trucks rolling. And if you think we're any less dependent on those trucks rolling, you, sir, are sadly mistaken. If we had a similar strike, a trucker strike, and a few blockades here and there, we're facing a trucker shortage, and it's scaring people. If you watch, some of the news and stuff, you'll find some articles where they start talking about the shortage of truck drivers, and no one's quite sure what's going to happen and what the effect it's going to have on the economy, because it's a hard life and nobody wants to do it, or very few people want to do it, especially aging people, and we are aging people. So there you go. Do with this what you will. Yeah, you think so? That's what you yelled from the barricade, right? Those capitalist pig dogs. Do with it what you want with it. I take it as a further sign that we're not preppers anymore. We've incorporated prepping into a larger lifestyle that we describe as being homesteading. Pastor Fox might call it "come out of her, my people." He'd probably call it homesteading too, or modern pioneer, or something, or neo-pioneer, or something. But this is one more sign, folks, that the world around us is more fragile than we think, and it is time to start preparing for let's call it a decentralization of services and prosperity. It's coming soon. I don't know how soon. It might be tomorrow. It might be 5 years. It might be 10 years. But it's coming, and it's time to prepare yourselves and your community with it. Men, we appreciate you. Thank you.